One of the most popular ways that people like to say one console is better than another is by shoving console exclusives right into somebody's face. But what about the exclusives that the other console has? Well, simple solution for that, just say those games are complete trash, whether that's actually what you think or not. Problem solved. But that was just something kids would do, right? Full-grown adults aren't still going online all these years later to argue with people they don't know. Never mind, folks, we're not all there yet. Console exclusives have always been kind of a weird deal. They're not evaluated in the same way that multi-platform games are because there's this added layer of how they make the console they're on either worse or better. They're a focal point up front and center as perhaps the most defining aspect of whichever console they're on. I mean, it's all about the games, right? That's what we hear time and time again. The thing is, people like to feel good about the console they have. If you're going to have one console over another one, then you'd better think it has great exclusives, or at the very least, better exclusives than the other console. Otherwise, what the heck are you doing? But it goes further than simply justifying which console you own. After all, a lot of retro gamers own multiple consoles now as adults, including some consoles considered to be rivals. Take the Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis rivalry, both personal favorites of mine. Back in the early 90s, most kids only had one of these. A huge portion of the games for each console were exclusives, and you just didn't see a lot of people who owned both back then. And if you did, instead of trying to brag about how one console was better than the other, they'd likely be bragging about how they owned both consoles. And if you happen to know anybody who owned something less common, like a Neo Geo or TurboGrafx 16, they might as well have been living in their own magical world since those consoles were so foreign to the majority of us. Anyways, most people only owned one console, so it made sense that people were arguing over which exclusive games were better. But why are people still arguing about it now? And especially if they own both consoles? Well, which games are better than others still matters to people. After all, gamers are pretty passionate about the games they play. People like to rank things from best to worst. I don't know why, it's just the thing humans do. I think what it comes down to is the legacies of these games is what's at stake now, and people want to see their favorite games take their rightful place in gaming history. So even if somebody now owns both a Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, they might still have a really strong opinion about what's better between Sonic and Mario, even though they don't necessarily hate one over the other and possibly even enjoy both of them. Imagine that, everybody getting along. I've always thought of console exclusives less as a way to wage war on other consoles and more as a way to enjoy what makes each console unique. I love the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis because of how different they are from each other. More modern consoles have libraries that have gotten a lot more homogeneous, which, to be fair, doesn't necessarily make the games themselves bad, with an overwhelming majority of the games being exactly the same outside of maybe some resolution and frame rate differences. With Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, a huge chunk of the worthwhile games are exclusives. Heck, even some of the games with the same names were totally different. There's so much that you can compare, and when you combine their two very distinct libraries together, you get 16-bit perfection. And yeah, I know for some of us, we've been socially conditioned by the Great Console War so that every bone in our body won't allow Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo to coexist in harmony, but I'm here to tell you that I've done it and it's great. I also think that a game being exclusive can often make for better games if we look at it from a development standpoint. Because consoles are typically branded a certain way, that can provide direction. For example, Sega branded the Genesis as cool and edgier than Nintendo, which seeped into not only the creation of Sonic as a character, but the gameplay of the game he starred in as well. Sonic was fast, and this required the developers to completely rethink how a platforming game would need to design its stages in order to accommodate this. Even though Sonic doesn't jive with everyone, I mean every game has its haters, it was still a great success. In needing to make an exclusive, innovation was encouraged, and I'd argue gaming was better for it. Sure, it led to a lot of other wannabe platformer mascots like our old buddy Mr. Nuts, but those games typically came from less accomplished developers who were just trying to hop on the bandwagon. If you want innovation, it typically comes from the more talented developers. Okay, but what about the main thing exclusive games do that bothers people, being that they exclude people from playing a game? The idea behind an exclusive game is to entice people to buy the console it's on in order to play it, but obviously that doesn't always happen. So then you have people who aren't able to play a game they would potentially really enjoy just because they don't have the system it's on, and that's kind of sad, right? I mean, just think of how many kids growing up missed out on games they would have enjoyed simply because they didn't have the console it was on. Remember, some people grow up and live their life the wrong way by not becoming a retro gamer. I know, believe me, it's disturbing, but it does happen. It's only some of us who decide these classic games are worth revisiting. And speaking of which, I think one of the biggest things a lot of retro gamers lick their chops over when revisiting older games is being able to finally play some of those games they missed out on. Sure, they might just go back to what they remember first, but then the prospect of playing some of the games that they couldn't play when they were younger becomes very enticing. I didn't have a Super Nintendo as a kid. Donkey Kong Country, you little devil, you elude me no longer. The thing is, games being console exclusives isn't really exclusionary for those of us going back to play older games as much as it is while consoles are current. Like I mentioned before, most retro gamers own multiple consoles and typically have the means to play whatever games they're interested in. Furthermore, most older games have a whole boatload of different ways that you can play them. Not only have some of these games been re-released, but they've also been stuck in compilations onto mini consoles, and I haven't even mentioned all the unofficial options there are to play these games. Point is, if somebody wants to play an older game, where there's a will, there's a way, and often multiple ways. The only thing that really keeps some retro games unobtainable is high prices of certain games, and that's only a problem for collectors, and screw them, right? Oh wait, that's most of the people watching, including myself? Never mind then. Alright. For this video's question, I thought we'd do something fun by having you comment on a specific console exclusive game that eluded you at some point, likely when you were younger, and what the frustration was like to not be able to play it. Like I hinted at earlier, my personal choice would be Donkey Kong Country. Okay, so be sure to leave your answers down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's the